I want to sort of tell you what I'm looking at with MySpace. In many ways, I tell the public I'm talking about MySpace, but that's actually only a fraction of what my dissertation is about. Since we're actually more of an academic audience, it's sort of like, I can tell you this and you won't be terrified. Most people look at me like, I'm interested in actually the status of youth and the shifts in public life for youth. So the concept of a teenager was actually invented by the marketing industry, but it came at a period where during the Depression, the labor movement decided that they couldn't afford to have the 14 to 17-year-olds in the workforce. So compulsory education came about during that period as a way to regulate that population into a controlled environment. One of the things that we did as sort of a gift was make it an all-encompassing high school experience. And part of it was that sports were a really big thing during the war as a way of getting people's minds off of what was going on and all of the political environments, to sort of work out negative energy. But it was a main thing that you would do within your labor community. So you would, your company or your factory would sort of team up against another factory, and it was a real bonding experience. In order to keep those team populations out of that as well, they created high school components of it. So you had this shift that happened in the 1930s where we started actually really closing down and encircling that teenage population, what we now call teenagers, young adults, when young adults actually meant something. And we sort of gave them a place, to become their own together. And there were a lot of other components to it, religious views and ideas that it would be for the health and growth of these children. In the 1950s, following the war, we had a lot of guilt about this, and we actually gave them a lot of expendable money. We created a lot of places for them to go hang out with, their own public spaces, movie theaters that were very targeted at teens, burger joints that had very particular teen constructs and were very supported, bowling alleys with teen nights, roller rinks, et cetera, et cetera. The nice things that you see 1950s movies made of. That community ended up, or that teen population ended up creating its own identity, brought on in many ways by consumerism, until the 1960s, when they decided to misbehave, and people decided they didn't like actually what teenagers were doing when they were left to their own devices. Following pretty much the Vietnam period, we started creating more and more regulations around what that population could do. So we gave them freedom to vote, but we also started restricting their access to a lot of things. Curfew laws came into being, ideas of when they could go, when they could work, what they could do, really sort of clamped down. Today, when I go and talk to parents, I deal with parents who can't remember a time where their kid was out of their sight. Except when they're at school or a controlled activity. They go from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. in a constant state of activity, a constant controlled space. The more those kids are controlled in middle class society, the more they react out with a lot of what we consider dangerous behaviors: anorexia, bulimia, cutting. Extreme sports being the positive version of it, extreme sex being the not so positive version. What is this reaction? What is going on? What has changed in their public life? And why are they jumping on MySpace? One of the things that I found looking at it was they're recreating a public world. They're creating a public online so they can go and do what most of us did growing up. Bike around the neighborhood, hang out, shoot the shit, do nothing, right? Like just socialize with their friends. And of course, from an adult perspective, it's like, this is a waste of time. But actually, it's a very critical informal learning period because it's how you figure out how the social world works. It's how you figure out status. It's how you negotiate community. It's how you get cultural understanding. And so they've already, this population in America has already been so contained by age-based segregation. It's really interesting that they're even more contained now than even when I grew up, and now they're moving it to online to try to have a hangout space. Needless to say, what teenagers do when they hang out is not always approved by adults. We tend to model ourselves 4 years ahead. 17 magazine is bought by 13-year-olds. We start reaching a level of hypersexuality in our performance by the high school years, sometimes by the middle school years, by looking up to what our notions of celebrity and our ideals are. So what is it that's creating this culture of MySpace is in many ways mass media culture. It's not, it's this relationship between mass media, between celebrity. The challenge of sites like MySpace is, of course, they have properties of mediated communities that are very different than properties of the physical publics that we're used to. Persistence, searchability, replicability, and invisible audiences.